Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics. My name is Olivia, and I'm a member of the Dole Institute Student Advisory Board, the official student group of the Institute. The Student Advisory Board is a bipartisan group whose members can access many great opportunities through their involvement with the Institute, including volunteering at programs and networking with our special guests. If you're a student and would like to join, please contact us by emailing dolesab@ku.edu or speaking with a student worker after the program. A video of today's program will be available on our YouTube channel soon. You can also access videos of the past programs by visiting our YouTube channel at any time. A loop hearing system is available to use if you have a T-coil hearing aid. We also have a limited number of listening devices. If you have questions about the loop system, or if at any time during the program you have difficulty hearing, please alert one of our staff members. After the program, we will have some time for the audience to ask questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and a student worker with a microphone will come to you. Please stand if you're able and ask just one brief question. If you are a part of our virtual audience, you may submit your questions at dolequestions@ku.edu. The Dole Institute's mission is to foster civil and respectful discussions around important and often difficult topics. Please phrase your questions with this in mind. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. Now, please join me in welcoming Senior Associate Director, Dr. Barbara Ballard.
Thank you very much, Olivia. We have student welcomes before all of our evening programs, and that's our part of our culture. We want our students to be actively involved. I will say good evening and welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics for tonight's program, A Conversation with Kansas County Clerks. This program is co-sponsored by the Kansas Chamber of Commerce. Before I introduce our guests, please turn to the back of your program for some of our upcoming events. We hope you will join us tomorrow. Generally, we don't have one after the other, but we will tomorrow. And our program will be at 7 p.m., and it's with KU's Political Science Department entitled A New Cold War, America, China, and Russia After the Ukraine War. Also, please join us for the next 5 Wednesdays at 4 p.m. For Jerry Seib's discussion group series covering the midterm elections. Tonight's distinguished panelists are, and I have to tell you, we are really pleased to have these county clerks with us this evening. It's a program we have not done before. It's a program that we think we should have done before because of the work that county clerks do in the state of Kansas. I will start with our panelist, Karen Madison from Cowley County. She was first elected in 2004. She is active in the Kansas County Clerks and Elections Officials Association, serving as president from 2018 to 2019. Karen has a BS in business with a major in accounting from Emporia State University and has earned Master County Clerk status in Kansas. Rich Vargo from Riley County. He was elected as Riley County Clerk in 1996. Rich also served as president of the Kansas County Clerks and Elected Officials Association and president of the Kansas Government Finance Officers Association. He served on state committees appointed by former Secretary of State Ron Thornburg in the implementation of the Help America Vote Act. Rich graduated from Kansas State University in accounting. Tina Spencer from Marion County. She has served as the Marion County Clerk and election officer since January of 2013. Spencer has served on the executive board of the statewide Kansas County Clerks and Election Officials Association. She completed a 4-year continuing education program to earn the designation of Master County Clerk in 2019. Jamie Shew from Douglas County. He was elected County Clerk, County Election Officer in 2004. Prior to his election, he worked in higher education administration and business management. He is active in Kansas Association of Counties and Kansas County Clerks and Elections Officials Association, where he served as president in 2014 and 2015. Jamie has achieved Master County Clerk status in Kansas and earned National Certified Election Registration Administrator status in 2017. Tonight's A Conversation with Kansas County Clerks will be led by Jamie Shew, Douglas County Clerk. You have a program before you, and there's a lot more that each of these individuals have accomplished. We only highlighted some of these this evening. It is with great pleasure, and I mean great pleasure, because I really worked Jamie Shew in order to get these county clerks here this evening. And I just want all of us to give them a warm welcome and know how much we appreciate what they do for their communities and for all of us. So please join me in welcoming Karen Madison, Rich Vargo, Tina Spencer, and Jamie Shew.
I don't know if you worked me as hard as I worked them. So first of all, on behalf of all of us, we would like to thank the Dole Institute for having this. This kind of came from some discussions this summer when I was speaking here about the feeling that maybe clerks haven't been telling our story and we haven't been talking about what we do much. We are really good at doing our jobs, keeping our head down and trying to stay out of the news. I have always said it's a great election if the day after it's who won or lost and not how the ballots were counted. But over the past few years, I think we could do a better job at telling our story. So I invited some of the peers that I really look up to that also represent kind of a diversity of our state, not only in size of county, but also in years of experience and just from all parts of the state. So I'm going to start with the old guy. No, the more experienced person. Rich has been, and it's a lot for Rich to come here from Riley County and K-State. This is home of a 5-1 football team, by the way. So, Rich, I want to start with you, which is you have been clerk since 1997, and a lot has happened. In just a few things have happened, not just in just the elections we've run, but some of the laws like HAVA and a lot of things we've put in place. Could you talk a little bit about, the challenges, how things have changed in the time that you've been clerk?
Yeah, I could take the whole time on that one, and kind of alludes to another question I know you have, but 1996, as the entire state was, Riley County was entire paper ballots, and I personally ran every ballot through an optical scan system. I was the one that handled each and every ballot as it went through, and the optical scan system counted those and tabulated those. But many of you probably remember the 2000 election in the Florida debacle and the hanging chads. So from that came the 2002 Help America Vote Act, which all predates all of your experience. And, that to me is the biggest change in elections. From the Florida experience, we were federally mandated to have electronic voting equipment. Paper ballots, paper systems couldn't be trusted. Humans make errors, and us humans still make errors. So mechanical devices count more accurately. And so federal legislation demanded that we have electronic voting, and still does in every polling place for disability purposes. And so that was the biggest change, and now we're coming full circle again, to where you hear people questioning electronic voting and some people wanting to go back to paper. And so the 2002 Help America Vote Act was the biggest change. I know some of you may find that hard to believe, going through some of the law changes we're going through now, but I sat on many committees at the Secretary of State's office with Secretary of State Ron Thornburg and Brad Bryant and Brian Caskey, developing those laws for Kansas to follow to comply with the 2002 Help America Vote Act. And the reason it was so big, all of the changes that we have on an annual basis, all of us have to do internally, but that change, all of our constituents had to learn and accept and train and teach how to vote on electronic equipment. And so we were going around to every Rotary Club, Lions Club, you name it, just to educate people, get those machines before them in a test environment. That way they felt comfortable when they went and voted on that equipment. So I've seen a lot.
Well, and I would agree. What a lot of people don't realize is that elections is really locally controlled. There is no federal election system, and even at the state level, there's not necessarily a state level election system. HAVA was the first time that you really kind of saw the federal government get involved in the mechanics of how ballots are run.
Yeah.
And that was a huge change.
And Connie Schmidt and I both, with Johnson County Commissioner at that time, her and I both sat on that committee with Ron Thornburg and his staff and other county clerks. And, you know, at that time, I was a big proponent of just pick one system for all of us to use in our state. That way we're all consistent, because you and I have different vendors that we use, and I'm a big proponent of throughout our state we all be using one system, because you hear of different stories, and I think our policies and processes can be more consistent, you know, if we all have one system, but we're not that way. But federal legislation got us closer to that.
So Karen, same question. Karen was elected the same year as myself. So you said the comment, we grew up together as clerks. You kind of spend a lot of time with that class that you come in with on the phone going, how do I do this? Because you don't want to ask the veterans, because you don't want to look like you don't know what you're doing, but you don't know what you're doing. So we spend a lot of time
yeah, you scramble around together.
borrowing ideas from each other. So, you know, it seems odd, but we've now been clerks for 18 years. Same question about what has changed, what are the challenges in running elections?
Well, I think, like Rich started out with the HAVA, when we took over, we then had to implement the HAVA that they had come up with. And so the first thing was changing from all paper. The very first election back to city school elections used to be in April. First election was all paper, and then immediately purchasing completely electronic equipment and going through that whole system, the education of the public and my community, and then going full circle right now where I went completely back to paper again. So the biggest challenge with me has been educating people one direction in my small community, and then turning around and re-educating them in another, and trying to promote what we do and how positive and everything it is. So I think it's almost become more challenging at this point where we are, and the misinformation, and trying to educate the public of how we balance out our elections and all of the things that we do to make sure that all of those votes are counted the way that they're supposed to count, not just the moment that you come and vote, but to make sure that the amount of people that check in matches the number that there is, and then trying to be as open to everyone and ask them to come in and watch, because I want them to come into my office, because once they see how it's done and understand, then they can go out in the community and tell other people, hey, this is what they're doing and this is how it is, and it just will promote our office even greater. And I think right now is almost more of a challenge than it was back when I originally started.
So Tina, all of us have been president of KCCOA at some point. You've now joined those of us that sit in the back row and talk about when I was president, I did it different, right? So Tina was the most recent president of KCCOA. It has been a trying time for the clerks since 2020. And one of the things I really liked when you were president is we'd get an email that would say, you've got this, we can do this, you're okay, right? And that was usually about the time that I was thinking about quitting. So, can you talk a little bit about, I know you spent a lot of time talking to clerks, because a lot of clerks were questioning a lot of things. Can you talk about, in your time as president, just kind of what you sense within the clerks, within the state right now?
So I think that if you all don't know, county clerks are public servants, and we have servants' hearts, okay? We do the job because we want to serve. And I think the biggest challenge that everyone is facing, there's two things really. One is there is so much there's been a public shift in opinion as far as disinformation and even turning towards malicious kind of behavior towards election officials. And also increased duties in other areas that we do, and seeming sometimes for political reasons only. And it makes your public servants forget the why. Why do we want to do this job? And it's to the point, you know, I could see that happening in our organization, and I mean, I felt it frequently, and you know, so that's when those emails would go out, because I just knew that everybody was struggling with that, because people don't recognize just how much of our hearts we put into every single thing that we do, especially elections. And so I think the biggest struggle that we have right now is and one of the things that I really tried to do was remind people of the why, and remind people that no matter what this voice over here, this really loud, single maybe voice is saying against you, you know what you're doing. We know what we're doing. And we just need to keeping on, because we are the doers, you know, of that work. And so, but I really think that when your county clerks get to the point where the why gets lost in the I don't know how I can keep going, you lose valuable skills and knowledge and experience and dedication, you know. And so we don't want that to happen. We need our dedicated servants to keep serving. So.
Tina hosted our most recent conference in May, and the conference was kind of centered around, don't quit, we've got this. And it was a huge boost, because I can tell you in the hallways there was lots of conversations of, I don't know how much longer I can do this. But you'd get up there and you'd say, hang on, we're all right. Talk a little bit about your communities. Each of us have different communities. Running an election in Douglas County is different from running an election in one of your communities. So tell us a little bit about your county, your communities, what it's like, what's maybe unique about running an election there, and what's something special that maybe somebody hasn't been to Cowley or Marion or Riley, what they should know. You can start out.
Me?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Cowley County is comprised of two cities that are roughly the same size, Arkansas City and Winfield. And for me, that's a challenge. Our county seats in Winfield, and trying to have as many of the services and the options, advanced voting and that kind of thing in both of those cities, so that the other city that's not the county seat doesn't feel, for a lack of a better term, like a stepchild or something like that, that they feel as important and as the Winfield people are. The communities themselves are very different. One's a little more blue collar, one's a little more white collar, and so there's a lot of differences in that respect as well. And we have a third in one city, a third of our populations in the other, and then a third is the farm communities around it. And so also trying to serve those farm communities. So it's a diverse area in a smaller population. Our population's about 36,000, and we're, if you don't know where we're at, we're along the Oklahoma border, just about 40 miles south of Wichita. So.
Yeah, Riley County, we're similar to Douglas County in that we have a D1 college, so that always has its own little intricacies with voters moving in and out and last-minute registrations when they want to vote, but they missed the voter registration deadline, and so that always creates challenges. And then we have a military installation, a large military installation, and you know, I think something that's I always kind of find humorous, and we just grin to ourselves as staff, is, you know, the day after the election, people come to you and say, aren't you glad the election's over? And we still have a month's worth of work. Especially with all the post audits and everything else that's added on. But even before that, you know, with having a military installation, and these folks have UO-CAVA ballots as well, and those are the federal ballots. You know, we have a large amount of federal ballots that we have to send to overseas residents of the United States. And so we have a larger population of that than anyone else in the state, so that makes it unique. And because of a college, you know, you have more transition of people in and out, and keeping voter registration rules as clean as possible, the way you can hopefully have those voter registration records accurate for the candidates and the people that want to be aware of that stuff. And being in a college town, you know, we always have to be up with the latest technology, the website's updated, easy access to information. So I think that's something that all counties have to do, but we really have to put an emphasis on that in a community our size.
So Marion County, our population is actually just under 12,000, and so, and we have just under 8,000 registered voters. So the smallest county represented here. We're primarily agricultural. Our largest city is about 2,800 people. And so I think probably it's a great place to live if you ever want to move there in your retirement. It's great. But I think that one of our biggest struggles, one of my biggest struggles as far as election administration, is finding enough Democrats to work at the poll sites, because we're primarily Republican county. And that, you know, is a struggle for us sometimes to get a bipartisan board for every single polling location. I mean, probably seems crazy to someone in a bigger county, but that's something we do struggle with, so.
This is a follow-up question. Do you see a rise in unaffiliated voters in your counties?
Yes.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think unaffiliated is the fastest growing, not only in the state, but like in our county. So when we think of kind of bipartisan boards, we've started to kind of expand that to include unaffiliated and actually also libertarian. But we consider unaffiliated poll workers just like Democratic and Republican, largely because so many people are unaffiliated. So I always talk about elections is like event planning. You're planning this huge event with all of these hundreds of moving parts and resources in this day, right? We're not allowed to say, we're not ready, come back next week. Sometimes you'd like to say that, but so you've got to make it work. Most people don't realize most of us start planning a year ahead of time. I've always said if you're building your plan 2 months before the election, you're behind and you're in trouble. So from your standpoint, what are probably the most important keys to planning an election as a county clerk? You can start.
Oh, good. I think that you have to have your calendar and your set. So know your dates, get your checklist, and kind of plan backwards. And the second thing for me is making sure you have key people in place. Those are the two biggest things for me, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd say schedule and calendar. You have to have that, but in elections, as all of us know, Murphy always shows up.
Yes.
And, you know, there's things that just happen, especially on election day. It never fails. And, you know, Jamie's right. I mean, 2 months prior to the election, if you're just starting to prepare, you're way behind. Just like I was referring to the Yoav ballots, the federal ballots. I mean, by law, we have to have those out 45 days prior to the election. That's what people don't understand. We're not ready just on advanced voting. We have ballots ready 25 days before advanced voting is even legal to start for all the other registered voters. And so it's planning and it's good people. I have great staff. I have great full-time staff, and our community, you know, we all had as I told my previous museum director, you know, living in historical times was overrated when you're going through COVID. And we lost a lot of poll workers. I don't know if everyone did, but we lost a lot of poll workers because of that. But I just made a public cry out to the community, you know, in press conferences, say, hey, we need people, and people showed up. You know, we had all kinds, which made challenges. We had less experienced poll workers, but at least the public was willing to step up and work the polls because we still had a lot of people. I mean, the mail ballots was tremendous during COVID, but we still had a lot of people going to the polls. So you have to have great poll workers. And when we do our training, I always emphasize that. We cannot conduct elections without volunteers for the polls.
Yeah.
I would just say definitely planning. My staff actually got on to me because sometimes I start looking ahead to the general and we're in the middle of the primary and they go, no, you have to stop and we're doing the primary first and then you can start planning ahead for the general. And and sometimes that's a couple days at a time. I'm like, okay, well, we need to change this already. So I think it's already looking ahead to what you need to fix, even though it's not fixing. But as those Murphy Law items come up, and you can only do this right here, you're like, okay, well, this is what I can do ahead of the 8-ball for the general election, and it kind of snowballs from there. So, yeah, definitely planning ahead.
I have one more.
Sure.
Always have a plan B, a backup plan
And C
for
and D.
every
Yeah.
every scenario.
Yeah. I mean, I always talk about nothing's going to go perfect. When, like, for us, you have hundreds of poll workers, you have thousands of voters, you have all these moving parts, something's not going to work. And if you get upset by that, then you're in the wrong job. And then my staff always makes fun of me because when things are going well, then I worry worse. Because
Why is this so easy?
why is it something really bad's getting ready to happen? Because it's going well. So I'm going to throw in a question that I didn't throw to you, but you made me think about it. I mean, we haven't talked about 2020. But like Rich, I know you and I spent a lot of time on the phone. Those emergency plans, the plan B, plan C that I had built was not ready for what hit us in 2020, right? In the spring of 2020, we were rebuilding how we run elections. Do you want to comment a bit about like what that experience was like and maybe what you learned, or do you not want to revisit it?
I just think it's something we all work through together as clerks, you know. And I truly think, you know, our Secretary of State's office, Brian Katz, you know, he has those weekly conference calls. We throw and bounce ideas off each other there, and then we get on emails and phones to each other and say, hey, it looks like this is going to happen. And all talking about the pandemic, what are you doing to prepare? And how can we accommodate the voters and, you know, encourage people to turn out when a lot of people aren't going to want to go to the polls. And so I think working together, we had to do things we never thought we'd have to do. I remember emails flying like crazy. All of us were trying to find hand sanitizer. Someone would find it, they'd blast an email out to all of us because we have a listserv for the clerks, and all of us would know where to go and get it. And my staff was flying to Abilene in Dickinson County because a farm store there had the hand sanitizer we needed. And so I think it's just working together. We always do have a plan A, B, C, and D, but it always never fails. You got to go to plan Z, one you never thought of. And I think that's really how we survived 2020.
I have a couple pallets of hand sanitizer now if you want some.
I think they just sent us something about how to safely dispose of expired hand sanitizer.
Right.
And did your insurance company send you something about not storing it in the basement?
No.
But
2020.
2020, I mean, everybody else wants to revisit it, don't they? I mean, but it was hard. It was really hard because of the pandemic, and we had some shutdowns and trying to, our people that wanted to vote by mail was 400% higher than typical. So we had 400% more people that voted by mail in 2020 in Marion County, and how to process all of those applications and get all those ballots out. A lot more work on the front end that we weren't really accustomed to, but we were able to bring people in. We worked to get it done. And then protecting the public and the poll workers as they came to vote in person and making sure that they had that ability to do that. And I mean, I think those are some of the biggest challenges that we had. And then, you know, just staffing, making sure that we had people available to work. And the thing that I walk away from, I thought 2020 was really difficult until we got to 2021. But, you know, I feel like in 2020, I walked away from it all at the end just with a feeling of huge accomplishment, because look at what we did. I mean, it was very difficult, but I mean, we accomplished it.
With
So
the largest turnout ever.
right, and I was really proud of that.
This must not be working. I don't know, can you hear me now? No. Now can you?
Try this one.
It still looks like it's on, I don't know.
Try this one.
Oh, can hear that one.
Now? No? Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, so talk loud. Can you hear me now? I still feel like it's not. So I feel like one of the best things, honestly, that came out of 2020, at least in my community, was our advanced voting. Our advanced voting exploded, and it's continued to explode. And I'm thankful for that one piece that did come out of it, because we had, in my small community, we had over 3,000 people come through during COVID just in our small office to vote advanced, and we're continuing that now, and I'm really thankful that it has, so I guess there's my one plus that came out.
The one thing I want to touch on that we don't talk about, there's been a big push lately to talk about how election administrators are people. We're your neighbors, we live in your community, we're, husbands, wives, fathers, mothers. In 2020, I think we forget also that, for security reasons, we couldn't work from home. We had to go to our offices because the only way that you could access the voter registration system was from our office. So while everyone else was working from home, we were going to our office. And I can tell you that as a family, my wife and I had a lot of conversations because at that very beginning part, we didn't know how things were spread. And she goes, you're really going to jeopardize us, right? But we still had a job to do. And sometimes we don't talk about that part, which is there's a human element to it with all the stuff that we do. I shared with you, if you ever want to look up, the Election Assistance Commission has a thing called the Competencies Wheel for election administrators. And it's this huge wheel that has just all these things that we're supposed to be experts at, right, to run elections. But in 101 counties, elections is supposedly only a small part of our job. In the top 4 counties, you have an election commissioner and a county clerk, but for all of us, we also have other parts of our job. Do you want to talk briefly about what are those other parts of your job that maybe other people don't see that, is happening on top of elections? Like when I asked you to do this, you probably were like, wait a minute, I got budgets, I got levies, I got elections, and you want me to do what, right? So talk about that a little bit.
I actually brought some calendars that we have in our office, some internal. I actually brought, can you hear me? Not working? Hello? Can you hear me now?
There you go.
There.
Can you hear? I'm talking pretty loud. Hello? Can you hear me? Is the mic working in the back? Okay, I'll talk up. I actually brought some calendars. We all, I think, have an election calendar. It was referred to earlier. We also have a budget calendar, and we also have an R&R tax roll calendar. And I have copies of those. And I know there's a few legislators here, and I'd love to share those with them. And I've probably got 30 copies. And all of those dates are all simultaneously go on when we're in the middle of conducting an election. And that's just for those 3 aspects of our job. And those are just the statutory date calendars of all those 3 primary functions, which are huge functions for all of our taxpayers, all the other public entities that we have to certify their budgets for. That doesn't include all the other internal dates that we have to have all that stuff done per statute, let alone, I didn't bring a calendar that we have for bi-weekly accounts payable that all of us do, bi-weekly payroll that all of us do, human resources and benefits that I think all of us do. I know it's in our department, plus homestead tax returns, plus wildlife and parks permits. I've got to be
House moving permit, I had that one a couple of years ago.
House moving permit, intangible tax filings, and I'm with the Board of County Commissioners Monday and Thursday for half a day every week. crazy for doing this.
You've been doing
You
it since
got this.
1996.
You got this.
I mean, that's why we're talking each other off the ledge all the time. Some of the state laws
True.
that the legislators have passed with this R&R and those requirements with our budget process, it's just about impossible.
Tina, you want to?
Well, I mean, I think that Rich really said it. You know, some of the biggest jobs that we are responsible for all hit at the same time as elections, and it is pretty insane, honestly. And the more that, and it just keeps getting added to. And this last year is a definite.
Well, if you can hear me, let me add one more thing onto it. In my county, I have a staff of 3, and I'm one of those 3. So you're looking at a lot of those things. I don't happen to have payroll or accounts payable in mind, but all of the other items that we talk about, we do. And there are 3 of us in there doing all of that at exactly the same time.
I think that's a part that's not talked about much, which is for a lot of the small counties, and especially the smaller counties, it's the clerk and maybe a part-time person. And they're still doing all of these things. While it may not be as many citizens, they're doing it with, them. And we've seen during COVID, there was at least one county where the whole staff was out because they all got it, and we had to figure out a way to kind of help them get through the election stuff. So one of the things is a lot of people assume that our jobs are very political. We are elected. We are elected on a partisan basis. But I can tell you that parties and politics does not come into how we run our offices or how we interact with each other, right? Maybe K-State versus KU, but not politics. And how do you kind of balance that, especially in your community, that you're seen as kind of this political person, you're running elections, and I always tell the staff that we're the calm center of the hurricane that's going on around us, right? So how do
I
you
like
kind
that. I
of
think I'm going to steal
how,
it.
how do you kind of negotiate that?
Well, we don't talk politics at all in our office. We don't support political candidates. I mean, obviously, we all have our own political views, but it's not something we discuss in the office ever. And really, we're completely happy if the political thing never touches us. I mean, obviously it does, and we all have our beliefs, but what I tell my staff is that we're Switzerland. So we're totally neutral in this office, and they take that to heart. And I mean, that's how we operate.
We do the same. There's no political talk within the office. Any candidate comes in and they want voter lists and that kind of thing, and it's the same advice that you give no matter what political party they are. Here's the list. This is probably what you need. This is the fields that you would need, and any kind of information like that. We're here to serve everyone no matter what, and we want everyone to vote no matter what the turnout is. The bottom line of it is we want everyone to vote.
Yeah, it's something. Oh no, is this thing working? Probably not.
And Rich is still
It's something I was going to mention earlier.
Oh, he's not holding the mic
How do
up.
we get the job done?
We need
We're
Rich to
sending
hold
out
the
that
mic.
information and reaching out to learn things from each other. We don't even consider which clerk's Republican or Democrat.
Yeah.
Jamie's a Democrat. I'm a Republican.
It's really nice
Great
and
friends.
solid now.
He's a Jayhawker too, so. We rib each other. We're great friends. He's a great
And
friend
I'm
of
getting
mine.
good
I
balance.
couldn't tell you the political party of 90% of our association because it doesn't matter. We all have a job to do. We all have to follow the same statutes, and we're out there to look out for the best interests of all our constituents. And I'll be stealing some of your thunder. It's one of the questions you have. What are you most proud of, or what you do in your community? And it's when you get that input from both parties that you're doing a good job in elections. Because that's all anyone ever really thinks we do is elections. They don't realize all that other stuff. And they say, especially going through the pandemic, when we were heavily pushing the mail ballots, and some of my biggest critics on the other side write me a letter and say, thank you for all you did for the community, and that's when we know we're doing our job good and right. And we
we've already touched on this a little bit, and the comm center part of it is, I couldn't do it without staff and the election workers. And I'm not just saying that because I know I have some election workers out here. 2020 was amazing because of all the people that stepped up. And I had one election worker's like, don't tell my children I'm here. They don't want me to be doing this, but I know you need help. I'm like, no, don't expose yourself. When the recount happened last August, it was announced in the news that we had a recount, and I had election workers that were in the parking lot the next morning going, all right, what do we do? Let's do this. I'm like, wait a minute, hold on. Talk a minute about your staff and about those election workers. And one of the things is like, how do you keep them, doing this, and kind of just a little bit about that team that you work with. Karen?
For my staff in my office itself, I kind of even asked them that question. Why in the world do you keep coming back? Because I have two staff members. One's been with me for 13 years and the other's been with me for 8. So I'm very fortunate, and we have a lot of knowledge within the office. And I think it is because it's a teamwork thing, and we're responsive, and we talk through all of the different scenarios and what's the best way to do it. My election workers, when I'm giving my classes, we have a notes page. It's like, will you please let me know if there's something that you see on that end that needs changed? And I've gotten lots of ideas from them in the past, and some of, not all of them have I done, but some of them I have, and I think they realize that, and they realize that responsiveness and the desire that we have as an office to do the best job that we can, and I think that's where they keep coming back. I'm very fortunate. This time we have 10 people on standby, so I have 10 more people than what I even need to work, and we had another one volunteer today. So I'm fortunate that I don't have the lack of poll workers and staffing that a lot of counties have had, so.
Yeah, we really don't have any problem with poll workers. We've created a great environment. I think we have great training. The staff does a great job in communicating and talking with them throughout the year, not just prior to elections, and they even have their own little coffee groups where they get together. They even have their, this working? Hello? Yeah, they even have their own little coffee groups where they get together and talk about working the polls and stuff. And, for the full-time staff, it gets more trying, because the full-time staff, you're just like all of us, you're working your tail off, and then all you hear is the naysayers and the people coming in and criticizing you and election fraud or this and that, can't trust the system, and question you about your systems, When you're working so hard during elections, 15, 20-hour days, and you're getting hammered with that, it really demoralizes staff, just like it did a lot of the clerks when we talk at our annual meetings. And we have clerks, we just had one leave at the end of last month, left before her term was over, and there's several that have left before their term are over, and several that aren't going to run again because it's just getting to be too much. And they'll tell you that. And these are clerks that have been in the business as long as me or almost as long as me. And that's a question I get at every meeting. How long are you sticking it out?
Tina?
Chocolate and coffee, lots of those kind of things. That's what keeps
Muncher's Donuts here.
Yeah. So I think we all have to, in my office, I just recognize that we're all tired, and they know that I'm going to be working right beside them. We all work together as a team. And then we have some very good, loyal poll workers, and they're the ones that you call on, and they're gonna show up every time. And like everyone else, we've lost some, but and getting newer ones is sometimes difficult. But yeah, just fostering that team kind of spirit where we're all in it together, we're all working together, and yes, chocolate and coffee.
We always talk about this is just a season. At some point, it'll be over, right? Just a couple more. I talked a little bit at the beginning about we haven't been telling our story, right? What is it that you think that we should be telling that we're not as clerks, as election officials to our communities?
Yeah, I thought about that one, and I go back to, I'm going to hand you all of the calendars that I've got, plus all the other responsibilities, and we just don't have time. I mean, that's part of it. And Riley County, you know, during the pandemic, we hired a PIO, a public information officer. I think that will help us because now we have someone to get that information out better than we can because they are trained professionally to relate and communicate with the media. That's not me. I'm an accountant. I'm a numbers guy. I'm a black and white guy. And so I think if we use some of those resources, because frankly, a lot of us just don't have the time for that additional duty that is needed. And so that's what in Riley County I'm going to rely heavily on as our public information officer to get that information out, whether it's tax roll, R&R, that we use them a lot this year for the R&R, and elections to help educate the public, to have someone tell the story for us.
I would say honestly that we all sit up here as humans, and all of our election workers are humans, and our staff, and the elections are not perfect. And if you want to pick it apart, you absolutely can pick it apart because we're all human. But we're humans that are trying to do the best job that we can and have the best secure elections that this entire nation can have. And honestly, if you could come to one of our meetings, I think you would see the hearts in all of the 105 election commissioners and the other 4 county clerks that all just support and want this and want everyone to understand that we're doing the very best that we can and have the best intentions, and we are not perfect.
So I think that the part of our story that maybe doesn't get told, well, a lot of it, but your county clerks and election officials are the subject matter experts in elections. And we do know the job, we do know what we're doing, and we're the workers. So I don't know if any of you realize this, but in my office on election night, so there's another thing too that needs to be told, which I'll tell after. On election night, we are so engulfed in what we're doing and the process. I never even know till the end of the night who won in our county. I never know until we post the final results. It's not like we're keeping track or watching. There's no time for that, and we're not interested. We care more about this process than anybody that you will ever meet because it is our heart and soul that we put into this and all the hours. And so you're not going to find anybody who cares more about the process and to make sure do you think any of us want it to be wrong? No, absolutely not. So, and I don't ever know what happened on a state or national level until the next day because we're always out of there so late. The news is already over, and I'm just like, okay, I'm going to bed. So we're invested in that process, and it's our heart and soul that we put into it. And then the second thing is that needs to be told is that an election is a process. It's not about one day. There are, as I don't remember who said it earlier. I think it was Rich that said, aren't you, when the public says, aren't you glad the election's over, like the next day? We still have a ton of work to do, and we still have results coming in because we still even have mail ballots coming in after the election. We have to research and process provisional ballots, do canvass. There's a lot more steps to get to the final result, and a lot of people don't understand that. I would say the majority don't understand that. And so the story that needs to be told is that elections, it's not about a day, it is a whole process.
I always talk about the canvas is the most important part of the election. It's not election night, that's unofficial, but it's when you sit down with those board of canvassers and you present the election and then they certify it. That's the moment when that election becomes real. And most people don't realize that. When you have a provisional voter who says, I want to be part of the real election on Tuesday, you're like, you're part of the real election because that's what happens at the canvas. So real quick, we don't brag about ourselves. What are you most proud of, that one thing of being clerk?
Well, I think I referred to it earlier. It's when you get compliments from both sides, everyone involved in the election process. And because some people feel that we are partisan in how we conduct our work when we absolutely aren't. And like I said, some of my critics come to me and say, hey, really appreciate the work you're doing. So that lets you know that they see what you're working your tail off to do in the best interest of everyone.
I would say that as well. I'm a Republican. That's how I run for office every 4 years. And my Democratic Party, while not strong in my area, there are a few strong leaders within the state that are in my area that have told me multiple times that they're happy that I'm the one that's there, and that makes me truly proud, because if they can see that me and my staff as well run an election that is there for the real results and a secure election, then that makes me feel the best.
I never just have one thing. So 3 things for me that I'm the most proud of. One is kind of streamlining our process and making it easier for voters. I love to try to increase voter access, and so I feel like that is something that I have accomplished. And speaking to young people about elections and getting them registered to vote, that's a huge thing that is important to me, and I have been able to do that frequently, and so I'm proud of that. And then really, I think every election we learn more, and so every time I can implement something new and something that makes it better for the next time, that's what I'm about, and that's what I am proud of. So.
Before we go to audience questions, I give each one of you a magic wand, and you get one wish of anything you would want for elections in your county. Anything. You can, no money, it doesn't involve money, resources, or anything, you get that one wish. So what is it?
For elections in our county, or for elections in our county or the nation? Because I would say...
It's your magic wand, you can do whatever.
I'd like both political parties to look out for the best interest of all of us.
Yes. 100% voter turnout.
Ooh, good one. Like that one.
I did.
That's awesome. I wish I would have thought of that. That's really good. Okay, really, we can only get one?
Yes, one. I'll get one.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so it's going to be a run-on wish.
You're the one that would argue with like the magic genie, right?
The wish for
Define
more
3 wishes,
That's
right?
So I would say no ridiculous write-ins.
If you've run elections, you fully understand that.
Yeah, I think that.
It will take us after this election probably 3 to 4 days with 3 boards to do the write-ins. And when you have someone that's doing a write-in race that matters, but so much of it is, Bill Self is not going to be township clerk in Wakarusa, right? I mean, might be his dream, but, he has a national championship. Yeah. Okay, so, so we've talked a lot. I think we're ready for some questions.
Thank you all for being here and answering our questions. The legislature has, over the past year, and I anticipate that it will be again in the legislature, to restrict things like drop boxes and length of time for mail ballots and advance voting. I'd like to know your reaction to those kinds of initiatives.
Well, I, for one, was very nervous on the Dropbox thing because, again, going back to my community, who has 2 cities that are roughly the same size, what was originally proposed was going to make my community drop down to 1 Dropbox, which would make it very difficult to be even with 2 different cities. And I was literally stressing because I was going to have to get rid of both. I was not going to even be able to have 1 because I can't have 1 without 2. It's impossible in my community. So there's my take on that one, and I could go on for hours on some of the other things.
I think the biggest thing for, can I answer? I mean, I'm a moderator, right? The biggest thing for me is that I just want the legislators to understand what they're talking about. right? I mean, Senator Francisco serves as a poll worker, and so when we talk about working, elections, she fully understands it as a poll worker. I would love everybody who serves on the election committee to come into our offices right now and see everything that we're doing. So when they are making those decisions, it's very informed, that it's very informed.
I would, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I would agree with Jamie. It does need to be informed. I will say that no matter what the legislature does and what laws are implemented, we will follow the law. Personally, I do not wish that voter access would be restricted because I'm very passionate about voting, and I want it to be accessible to everyone who's qualified.
Yeah, unfortunately, with the tenor of the legislators that are making those laws right now, I mean, we have clerks that testify, but, early in my career, late 90s, early 2000s, I'd testify at the legislature a lot on a lot of various things, and the legislators back then actually listened and treated us like professionals and took in our advice and really listened, and I since testified on the tax lid, not too distant future, in the last 10 years, and they don't even really watch you when you're speaking. Their minds are made up, and so, unfortunately, with the current tenure, I'm not as active as I used to be because their minds are made up, and so it's like Tina said, we just have to follow the laws they give us, and we definitely don't agree with all the laws, but we take an oath to follow them, and so that's what we do.
Like most Americans, I've taken for granted the people who run elections. And personally, I have no problem with the current generation of clerks. It's the next generation that scares me to death. Are there safeguards in place? Is there something there when you get a county clerk whose primary qualification is shouting fraud louder than anybody else?
Never bashful, you know that, Jamie? Yeah, I mean, that's the great thing about elected officials. Whether it's a county commissioner that's doing something wrong or me as a county clerk, and I tell people, I just tell them frankly when they're talking about election fraud or not trusting what we're doing, I say, well, then you need to get rid of me. And there's a way to get rid of me. I'm elected. I'm just honest with people. If I'm doing something that's illegal, you can have a recall election. But if nothing else, don't elect that person the next time they're up for election. So legally, there are remedies to that situation. So like I say, in Kansas, we don't have any of that going on, but that is the legal process. And that's what I tell people. If you really think your election official that's in charge of elections is doing it incorrectly, don't vote them back into office, including myself. But like these people say, we are doing everything correctly. People don't like it, but we have to follow certain laws, and there's no one more invested in it than all of us that are on the front lines. And, another thing referred to something Jamie said earlier is, that's what I tell people. If you don't trust the system, don't talk about it at the coffee shop. Come and talk to us. We don't have anything to hide. We'll tell you exactly what we're doing. Come and talk to the professionals, the ones that know election administration inside and out. Don't listen to the legislator that has an agenda or believe, that they passed this legislative law because there was something wrong. Talk to your election official that is the professional that will tell you the truth.
I think that is a concern across the country, not just at the local election level, but the state election level. And so I know that's been a discussion. For Kansas, there's a lot of laws that are in place that kind of take us out of the process. So those laws should be followed. And if those laws aren't being followed, then there's a legal issue. So for example, advanced voting. Advanced voting basically is run by an advanced board. It's a bipartisan advanced board that goes through all the envelopes and does all that stuff. I don't touch them. I don't do it, right? So if you're following the laws, for the most part, the clerk shouldn't even be part of that. But in smaller counties, maybe you don't have a bipartisan board or something like that. So I think it does become up to the community to hold that person accountable for those actions.
And I would say, I would echo, there are a ton of laws and regulations that govern elections. And so it doesn't, I mean, whoever comes into a position, say I'm gone, the next county clerk, they're going to have to follow those same laws. And so there are safeguards in place as far as the process. There's a question in front.
Thank you. I know that the legislature changed the timing of some of the elections so that now instead of April and November, they're all happening in November. How has that affected your work as you're balancing it with everything else that you do?
I'm not as involved with my kids getting ready for the fair and 4-H because we always have the fair the first week of August. There's been pluses and minuses on my side. Rich's discussion about the calendar, it now puts every fall there's an election while also doing the levies and the tax statements and all that stuff. So it has really impacted the calendar. I do think, from my personal opinion, and you guys can say, it has impacted the ability of the voters to just know every August and November there's an election. I think it sometimes confused voters that there was an election in April. So I think it has provided some consistency. But probably the biggest thing for me is I would notice when we would come out of a presidential election and go into a spring election, turnout was really down because I think people were exhausted by a presidential election. So it gives kind of some space in that. While it has made things probably a little more difficult for us, I do believe it has been positive for the voter, but they could say differently.
No, I mean, I agree too. I agree there's consistency with it. And honestly, in even years when it was in November anyway, we still had the same things that we had to do. And so, I mean, every other year, yeah, maybe you actually got to do taxes without having to have an election, but even for me, now that I'm used to it, it's easier for planning purposes. I mean, maybe part of what everyone doesn't realize is that you may not live elections we do. My life is on hold during elections. I would never in a million years, unless Jamie requests, plan something in October because that I had to drive 3 hours for one way. Because, see, that's how much he means to us. Because this is election time, and it is what it is. I know that July, at least in even years, because I don't always have one in odd years, but July is off the books. I would never dream in a million years of a vacation in July. No, and so, or November. So July, August, no vacation. October, November, absolutely not, because the election, again, isn't over on Election Day. So it's a consistency for my life as well. In the spring, I can go on vacation, maybe.
I think that those are positives. I think that it sometimes is confusing for people who want to file for a city office because they have to file by June 1st, and then if there is no city primary because it's nonpartisan, but it's being thrown in with a partisan election in August, I think that is confusing sometimes because what triggers a primary in a city would be the number of candidates that file versus a partisan election. And so they file, and then they wait, and they wait, and they wait, and they wait, and then their election is not until November. And so I think that is a little strange for people. But again, and the other thing is, so all the pluses they said, so I'm not trying to be negative about it, but the other downfall that I see is that on an already lengthy ballot, you then add city races. Like on an even year election, we have some cities that still have an election. And so on this upcoming election, our ballot is even lengthier because we have some city offices on there. And so those things, I think, are not the most positive.
Agree with everything. The other thing that I thought of with this is, as a brand new clerk, it gives you some time to figure things out. Because you take office in January, and when it was in the spring, you ran a primary in February. And then I remember, so I took office in 2005, and everybody's like, oh, spring elections aren't that big of a deal. Does anybody remember what happened in March of 2005? The gay marriage amendment was on the ballot, which was a big deal in our county, and it was a way bigger election than I thought was going to happen. And so it truly was trial by fire. And so I think it does give that clerk a little bit of time to prepare for that election.
And I do love that the voter turnout can be higher because they're already voting for other things. So.
Yes, I was wondering if you could speak to ranked choice voting.
So if you're not familiar with ranked choice voting, what ranked choice voting is instead of going in and saying, you know, I'm just going to do the oval for this one person, you can do like 1, 2, and 3. And then if nobody hits 50%, then the person that's at the bottom drops off the ballot, and then the second choice then gets that vote. And you keep going until there's a majority. It kind of started as something within cities, although we now see Maine, Alaska is now doing statewide ranked choice voting. It hasn't been discussed much in Kansas. The positive ranked choice voting is that you do end up with a majority. So you don't end up with a person who wins with 32%, right? What can be confusing to voters is you're not going to know the results until much later, and the person that was ahead on that night 2 weeks later could be second place or third place. So there's an education part to it. I think it's a conversation we could have. From an election administrator point of view, it's difficult because all of our equipment needs to be able to do ranked choice voting. And if not, then you've got to kind of basically use an Excel spreadsheet and try to build that. So from an administrator's standpoint, I haven't looked at it much, but I know that it has some complexity to it. But my answer to that is I'm not against it. I think it just requires some conversation. I think in Kansas, for me, we do talk a lot about like the things that maybe we should stop, you know, drop boxes and so forth. I don't think we spend a lot of time talking about what do we want elections to look like 20 years from now. And what are the things that are out there that we would like to at least have a conversation? Doesn't mean that we're going to have ranked choice voting. Doesn't mean we're going to have same-day voter registration, but we should at least talk about it and have a conversation about it.
So candidates in other states are boasting that once they get in office, that regardless of how people vote, that they will decide who won the election. What would you do if that happened in Kansas?
Well, I don't know if you'd have to look at state law. I think they're talking about on presidential level. I think Kansas is pretty clear on state law about how that is done. Some of those states where they're talking about there is some, does the governor get to decide who the electors are and so forth, and I think that's where that's coming from, okay. But that's about my knowledge of it. You guys haven't jumped in at all.
I often get a lot of those questions on what else is going on nationally, and I just frankly tell people I got my hands full here locally, so that's really what I focus on, and I really don't follow the national rhetoric.
Same.
Yeah, I don't either.
I think that you two maybe just made my head explode a little bit, but it's okay. I think that as far as the electors, I think the people that actually vote for those electors then have to hold that process accountable. You know, is it possible for them to choose someone else potentially? But the public then, the voting public would need to be the ones, I feel, that hold those individuals accountable for that action.
When you talk about constitutional amendments, all right, in terms of when they're on the ballot, how much does that increase the voter participation rate?
Well, you can look at August. I had 48,000 voters, and normally it's 15,000. I don't know if that was anticipated when the legislature did that. One of the interesting things about August that I've been talking about is 47% of 18 to 24-year-olds in Douglas County voted, and usually it's 5% in a primary. You know, I think it depends on the constitutional amendment.
Yes.
I mean, we have 2 constitutional amendments this time. I don't know if they're driving much turnout, but I mentioned 2005, the gay marriage amendment did. So I think it is kind of whatever the topic is of that constitutional amendment.
I agree.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It depends on the content of the question.
None of us expected August. I can tell you, none of us sat here and said, we're going to run a general election in August. We're going to have that many voters. And I think even by July, we were still going, is this really happening? Because, yeah.
From the YouTube channel. In states like Arizona, election officials have had to relocate their families and even go into hiding due to safety concerns from the public. Can you talk a bit about how that plays into your decision to stay in office or do these jobs?
Well, I think it goes back to that why, you know, that I talked about earlier. It is hard. I mean, in Kansas, we are, I feel like we're fortunate, but there's still a lot more, there's a huge shift in the rhetoric, I think. And it's hard for election officials to continue to pour their hearts and their time into this. And our families can be affected. I don't know of anybody that has had to go into protective type situations, and I really hope that never happens in Kansas. But just the whole climate is, it makes it much more difficult to do our jobs.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say I'm not aware, and I don't know if any of you are, of any of the officials in the state of Kansas that have gone through that level of threats or concerns for their family. But I can tell you, we know from our peers and from staff that we work with at the state, people feel the pressure, even though they're not getting direct threats from all the rhetoric. It's wearing on people.
Yeah.
And Jamie and I were talking about this earlier today, about a good individual we work with at the state. And many of our peers, we talk to them at our conferences, and we may talk to some at KAC, and it's wearing on them. And they're not getting those types of direct personal threats that they are in other states.
I have a friend of mine in Arizona that she just stepped down, and she stepped down for that reason. I mean, she couldn't put her trash out in front of her house because it was being dug through, and the threats just got so bad, not just her, but pretty much all of her staff quit. We haven't reached that level. I can tell you that the threats have increased. Each one of us probably have a story of that. I mean, you always have an election, somebody say something. But I would say over the past couple of years, some of those have caused pause. I've had, there's been some comments to some of my family, right? And you do ask yourself, at what point is it not worth it when it reaches a certain level? And we worry about our staffs, or our poll workers. I mean, any of the election board workers can tell you that over the past few elections, there's a lot of, there's a little more comments made, no like real threats, but it is something that we all talk about and think about. And I think if you were to say that it doesn't impact it, then you're not being honest with yourself. We aren't a swing state, so we haven't received it like Arizona or, Pennsylvania and so forth. And some of the stories out of there are pretty crazy. And so I think the thing that I would say is it's time for those communities to step up and protect their offices and their officials. So there's a silent majority, right? So it is time for those communities to start saying, we believe in our election office and we're going to protect them.
Yeah, and really for the first time in maybe ever, when all the election officials in the state got together in May for our conference, we had to prioritize security. And in the past, it wasn't a big deal. I mean, but this time it was. And I mean, we did it behind the scenes and we did it, but it was something that I had to plan. Mm-hmm. So.
And that's it right there. It's making staff aware and aware of the animosity and and everyone in our offices too say, well, it's Kansas, it's not going to happen here, but as the leader of the staff, we still have to plan to protect our staff, because you can't just sit with your head in the sand and go, okay, well, it's Kansas, it's not going to happen here, because the animosity is building. So it does affect us.
Because it is hard, I've said this quite a bit. We mentioned 2020 and how much we poured in to make 2020 happen, and the turnout was tremendous. And I can tell you, after the August and general election, I held my breath worried that I would have a super spreader event in one of the polling places. I worried about the poll workers, I worried about my staff. We pulled all of that off, and the result is to be questioned and to be vilified, and instead of kind of lauding what happened, we're now fighting this. And that's part of the struggle that is exhausting, which is you're like, we pulled that off, and this is what we're dealing with right now.
Yeah. All right.
Any other questions?
Did you have a question? Yes. One more. Well, is there two questions? All right, we have two questions. This one, and then right there.
Hi, I was just curious about what you're seeing with vote by mail and advanced voting. Do you think it's going to continue at the rate that it is like during COVID and post-COVID?
Our mail advance was tremendous during COVID, and it has fallen off in my area anyway, but our in-person advance voting continues to grow. So I think that definitely that got people in the mindset of voting and not just having to wait till election day. So I think it's going to continue to grow.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I don't think we'll see the level of mail ballots that we did during the pandemic, but I'm just amazed, when it comes to educational and provisional ballots and advanced voting, that you still get people say, oh, well, I didn't know anyone could advance vote. But generally what we find is once someone advance votes, they do it every time because of the convenience. And, I'm a big advocate in our community for advanced voting. And the reason I tell people during the press conference, I say, you never know what the weather's going to be like in Kansas. I've been an election official since 1997, and the only time that I had to go and pick up poll workers in a four-wheel drive because we had ice that day was an April general election. And that's just Kansas weather. So take advantage of those 20 days prior or advance by mail and make it convenient for you and participate in the process.
We have seen a great increase in those voters that like to come and vote ahead of time in person. And our I mean, the same as everyone else. Our advance by mail is less for this particular election, and I don't know that we'll ever reach what we were in 2020 because of the pandemic being so new and scary at that time. But
advanced voting has been growing in our community and continues to grow. In 2012, we started doing a mailer, which I think we didn't experience some of the mail ballot challenges many of you did because we'd already kind of increased that. I think it will continue to grow. You know, Kansas is very unique, having no excuse advance voting 20 days prior. Missouri, you have to have like a notarized reason to vote, right? And I think a lot of people, once they realize it, like Rich said, they go, wow, this was kind of easy. I walked right in. I didn't have to stand in line, and there you go. I got to vote. So we find that when more people do it, then it stays. And a lot of people tried it for the first time in 2020 and have kept with it. So I think it will continue.
I'd just like to go back to 2020 and and what you pulled off with changing with all of the information that was coming in and allowing more people than ever to vote. And I just want to invite the audience to jump up on your feet and thank these people because you deserve it.
Thank you.
Well, I'll say thank you very much, and then we'll do it twice. Because when you like something and it's good the first time, it's even better the second time. So I would just say that. I will also say that we do have voter registration for someone may not be registered to vote, or you have changed from one apartment or a house or your address in the back. And Tyler Leggett will be back there to take care of that if that's the case. But as I told you, this was a special treat tonight. And I know you had sacrifices and that you don't go anywhere in October, so we feel very privileged that that is the case. But I really say give them a round of applause because you know what? They answered your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And of course, I was bragging about Jamie because we know about him, but I thought equally as well. I know you're from Manhattan, but it's okay. You know what I mean? And it's great. And besides, you have to understand, my PhD is from K-State. So I would say in many ways, again, give him a round Jayhawk applause. Thank you so very, very much.